Welcome to the frozen heart of the North, where the nights are endless and the silence hides something sinister. In today's video, we're diving into 5 terrifying Alaskan horror stories that will chill you to the bone. From haunted wilderness cabins and mysterious disappearances in the snow to creatures lurking in the endless dark, these true and legendary tales will make you think twice before stepping into the Alaskan wild. If you love real horror stories, creepy folklore, and unsolved mysteries from the coldest corners of the world, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what's waiting in the dark. They call us a lot of names: freelancer, tracker, monster hunter, labels that mean less to me than a warm bed or a clean gun. I don't work for any lodge or guild. I freelance the kind of jobs that make other hunters hang up their coats. Folks in the trade use an old nickname for me, but I don't keep score. Call me Rowan if it makes you comfortable. I just do the job, collect my pay, and try to come back in one piece. The call came on a morning that started ordinary: black coffee, greasy diner eggs, and the kind of small talk strangers trade when they don't want to interrupt your solitude. A father had hired me. 4 campers had gone in and never come out. A small search party had gone after them and vanished too. With a frost season coming on and the northern things getting bolder, it smelled like trouble. Work had been slow, so I said yes. I travel light, but I like to be ready. My pack usually holds a compact crossbow, a sidearm chambered for silver rounds, a vial of aconite tincture, heavy gloves, a coil of cord, and rations. For this trip, I threw a flamethrower over my shoulder. Fire is a language most predators understand. The aconite and silver aren't sentimental, they're practical. Between them, most of the things I hunt don't last long. You should know something about these creatures. Geography matters. In the contiguous states, they'll often work alone, using voices and mimicry to draw people out. Up here, Alaska and the Yukon, their behavior changes. They travel in groups, move with brutal efficiency, and they hunt hard. If you ever get a warning about the North, take it seriously. The months from fall into early spring are the ones to avoid. Anchorage hit me like a cold wall when I stepped off the plane. The man who'd called met me at the terminal. His accent was thick and jagged, the kind that makes the vowels feel like blunt tools. He'd lost his daughter. He swore it wasn't the usual thing, not a Wendigo, but whenever I asked what he thought it was, he clammed up, like the name itself might call it back. That bothered me more than any lack of detail. Fear that keeps itself quiet usually has teeth. The walk to the campsite was 5 miles of wood and scrub, and that uneasy feeling of being watched. By the time the sun gave me 2 hours of light, I decided to move fast. Night out here is a different animal. If I had to fight after dark, I'd rather have the moon on my side. The sight was chaos. Tents were shredded like paper, gear strewn in ways that suggested panic and violence both. Blood flecked the trees and darkened the snow, but the fire ring showed recent coals. Someone had lit a fire the night before. That told me one thing: someone had known how to keep these things at bay. Near the pit, a man's body lay open, organs exposed and absent. The claw marks fit the profile of northern predators I know, but the feeding pattern didn't match anything I'd cataloged. Corpses without blood, organs consumed cleanly, that's not ordinary. Vampires steal blood. These things were doing something else entirely. Further out, I found the search team. 2 more bodies, same brutal inconsistency. And then, as if mocking the idea that only one predator had been involved, I found the broken remains of a large, antlered creature. It was a Wendigo, shredded beyond recognition. Its antlers snapped, its frame crushed. Something had torn through it. That's when I had the choice: leave and report, or stay and find out what had killed a Wendigo. I decided to make a stand. I laced a ring of flame around the clearing, a small barricade of heat between the trees and me. I wasn't alone for long. A voice came from high in a fir, thin, trembling. "Don't do that. Fire brings it," she said. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Hair tangled, face scraped raw, eyes wide and raw as bone. I felt the reflexive pull I always feel the first time, the urge to save anyone who still breathes. She was small but stubborn, clinging to the branch like a frightened sparrow. Her name was Jillian. She'd been hiding up there while the rest of her group had been taken. Before I could sort the situation, the woods announced movement fast, a force that bent branches and broke saplings. I kicked myself up the tree, hauling my gear and clutching the flamethrower until I had to let it go. Adrenaline makes strange muscles. She choked a sound that might have been a scream, and I clamped a hand over her mouth. The thing that hit the clearing was not a wolf you'd see on any nature show. It was enormous, fur like bristling armor, nearly 7 feet at the shoulder, eyes burning with a red glow that felt like accusation. It paused, sniffed the air, then paced our ring of fire and stepped through it clean as a man walks through mist. Not a hair singe. It stayed watching. The thing didn't surge at us, it studied, patient and cruel. When the distant screams of smaller predators, wendigos, rose in a chorus, the beast melted back into the trees. It wasn't gone. It was stalking, calculating. I knew the score. If the big thing came back, it would not try to drag a tree down for sport. It would wait us into mistakes. We traded names and whispers. She said her friend's grandfather had told her the name Wahila. Hunters' mouths get tight around that name. The Wahila, if the folktales were true, was an alpha of a kind. Wolves infected and bound to its will, monstrous and patient. Men who chased it rarely returned. That alone should have been a turn signal to run. But curiosity is a bad compass for a hunter, and revenge or resolve, call it what you will, pushed me onward. I coated bolts with aconite, the tincture bitter and potent. I handed Jillian my pistol and told her to run if things went south. Run and don't look back. She clutched the weapon like a talisman and settled into the branch beside me, more brave than either of us had a right to be. We waited. Night fell. The full moon lifted its pale face and painted the trees silver. The smaller predators came first, stumbling and screaming into the clearing. The big thing hit them like a freight of teeth and bone. That was my moment. I fired. The bolt struck deep between its shoulders as it tore a shrieking wendigo into pieces. The alpha let out a howl that felt like the trees themselves convulsing. With a wounded yelp, it bolted from the feeding frenzy. A wendigo, greasy and insane, scrambled to the tree and tried to climb. Before I could reload, a single shot cracked through the night, a clean, decisive gunshot, and the thing pitched and stopped. Jillian set the pistol down, hands shaking. We climbed down and ran, sprinting toward the roadhead as the cold air bit our lungs. At the last clearing before the path, the alpha returned, bolt dark in its hide but still moving, poison slow and stubborn. It lunged. I fired once. The shot struck true, and the beast collapsed with a sound that toppled stones. We stumbled toward my truck and radioed the nearest town. They were skeptical at first, then agreed to send men to pick up the bodies. Even as we left, I could have sworn a pair of red eyes watched us from the shadow of the trees. We'd barely put distance between ourselves and the clearing when things went sideways. Jill grabbed my phone and started broadcasting a quick update as I kept one eye on the road. About 30 miles out, something massive struck the truck's rear like a battering ram. The bed folded, metal screamed, and the whole rig spun out before careening off the narrow road. We slammed into a tree, glass exploded inward. The airbags hit us hard. I tasted copper and felt the weight of a bruise spreading across my ribs. In that instant, a cold certainty sank in. We hadn't finished the Waila. It had found us again. The howl rose then, a sound that wasn't so much heard as felt, a raw keening that dug into bone. It was a lie to think the first fall meant death. They faked defeat to get us moving. Rage radiated from beyond the trees. You could feel it as pressure against the truck. Scraping and tearing came from all sides. The lone Wahila had returned with 3 others, each of them even more immense than the first. The bolt in its flank had been mostly snapped when it charged. They began testing the metal with their teeth and claws. Jill's hope drained in visible, hot tears. I went through my pack with shaking hands, searching for anything to stop a pack from ripping the vehicle open. My fingers closed on two compact devices, the kind you only ever use if everything else has failed. One was a last-ditch detonator, messy, final. The other was meant to stun and blind, a short window of chaos we could use to run. "I've got an idea," I told Jill in a low voice, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She stared at me hard, waiting. "When I throw this, don't look back. Run the road until you find a rundown cabin. It's about a mile. Stay on the path. I'll meet you there." She nodded, swallowing whatever fear lodged in her throat. The windshield cracked when a massive skull smashed into it just as I pulled the pin and tossed the blinding device overhead. Light and metal shards erupted, turning the night into a white storm. For a moment the beast staggered, disoriented, but not all. The Alpha, the biggest of the four, slammed into the truck again with a fury that pinned metal into wood. We scrambled free as the vehicle lurched and crushed one of the pack between itself and a trunk. Their cries tore at the forest as we bolted. Adrenaline kept us moving. Branches whipped at our faces, roots snagged at our boots. The cabin came into view, sagging and weather-bleached, a single layer of boards that might be enough. We dove inside and a huge hand clamped over Jill's mouth. I swung instinctively, then froze. It was a human hand. Quiet came a thick voice, dark as soil and accented. A man filled the doorway, massive, bearded skin like leather from living outside, shoulders that looked capable of splitting trees. He moved like someone who'd learned how to live rough and was not easily startled. Behind him, the animals paced and snarled, unwilling to cross the threshold. The man disappeared into the back and returned with something I wish I hadn't seen, a severed wahila head held aloft. At the sight of it, the wolves backed away and dissolved into the timber like smoke. "Name's Mikal," he said. "You're safe for now, but you help me finish this." His accent was thick, but his tone was steady, not unkind. "I tried everything, silver, poisons," I said. "None of it stopped them." He shook his head slowly. "Those tricks work on many things. Not on this. Wahilas bind wolves. The Alpha is the key, kill it and the pack dies." He spoke like a man stating a cold law of nature, not a superstition. He produced an ancient blade from behind a pile of hides. The metal had a peculiar sheen, a foreign alloy I'd never seen in a blade. Etchings decorated the hilt. "Only this severs what binds them," Mikal said, setting the sword into my hands. "It is made of a rare fusion, strength and give. It has cut what others could not. You must be the one. The beast wanted you the moment you met." His eyes were unreadable. He left us the shelter and kept watch while we slept on a threadbare mattress. I dreamed in half-formed fever, teeth, blood, a weight on my chest. Dawn found us alive. Mikal cooked venison over a small flame. The meat tasted like salvation. We ate light. Fat would slow a man down, speed was our currency. "We go while the light is honest," Mikal said. We followed him in silence to a yawning cave mouth that smelled of damp stone and old animal sweat. This was the lair. I felt every hair rise on my arms. Jill and Mikal each took positions on either side of the entrance while I stood center, sword in hand, flares and rifles at the ready as distractions. We didn't want to kill the pack with bullets, only to create a window for a single, true strike. On my signal, the flare streaked into the darkness, and the cave answered with a howl. 4 great shapes burst from the black like storms. 2 veered left toward Mikal, 1 angled right for Jill, and the Alpha bore down on me, taller than I'd imagined, its shoulders a forest of muscle, fangs that might as well have been daggers, eyes burning with the sort of intelligence that felt like contempt. The first impact slammed me into the dirt. The sword flew from my grip. Pain exploded across my chest. I tasted iron. Jill's rifle barked, the rounds did what they could, but the beasts were brutal and relentless. Mikal fought like a bear, his strikes brutal and precise, but I could see the toll the fight took. Bullets dimmed, flares spent. This was going to come down to steel and stubbornness. Teeth found flesh. I felt ribs crunch. Breath left me like a leak. Time thinned to a knife edge. I grabbed for the final device, the one that would burn everything organic where it detonated, but even thinking about that option felt like surrender. I shoved the smaller flash screen into the Alpha's eye as it loomed and it reeled, blinded for a heartbeat. Jill screamed as her attacker closed on her. I rolled, found the sword, and scrambled to my feet. The Alpha pinned me down, jaws crushing, but the blade found purchase in my hands. With the last of my strength, I drove the edge upward. Metal tore through hide and bone, and the head came away in a ruined arc, dropping to the ground with all the finality of thunder. The other three convulsed and went still. Life left them like wind leaving a room. Then everything went black. When I came to, white lights seared my vision. Machine's breath for me. Mikkel and Jill leaned over the bed, both bruised and scratched, alive. One of my lungs was gone, blood had been taken and then replaced by strangers with steady hands. I had been carried out of the cave and through the night and into a hospital as the world spun back into focus. Surgery and recovery would take time. I would be weaker, scarred, but alive. They say legends don't always die when you cut their heads off. Maybe that's true in some other sense. The stories keep going, people keep telling them. But the pack in that den stopped moving when the Alpha's head hit the dirt. For now, that's enough. I'll be around eventually to tell more. For anyone listening, respect the woods. Respect what stalks them. If you hear the low keening of something not quite animal, get out and don't stop until the lights of civilization swallow you whole. This is my own account of something that happened in Alaska in 2019. I've only ever told my therapist and my closest friend about it. Even after many therapy sessions and attempts at exposure therapy, I'll explain that later, the memory still clings to me. Maybe putting it out here will let me breathe a little. As I mentioned, it was 2019 and I was 25. I'd been scrimping and saving for a backcountry camping trip up north. I live on the East Coast. My regular job paid okay, but I picked up odd jobs for extra cash, painting houses, house sitting, pet sitting, and the usual gigs to cover the trip. A friend connected me with their uncle, a bush pilot, who agreed to fly me into a remote site. That was my first big mistake. I had very little real backcountry experience beyond weekend state park trips and a few outings from my Boy Scout days. Mark, my friend's uncle, knew a few remote spots that were, by bush plane standards, reachable if something went wrong. That still didn't mean close to a road. Getting to any highway would have meant a strenuous, day-long hike through rough terrain. My parents helped buy emergency supplies, extra food and hydration packets, a first aid kit, bear spray, and other basics. Mark loaned me a spare rifle just in case. As a non-resident, I could legally carry a firearm under state law, and borrowing his saved me the paperwork and airport hassle of transporting my own. I'd hunted a bit as a teenager, so I wasn't completely unfamiliar with firearms, but I knew solo backcountry responsibility was a different level from those old memories. Mark also gave me a satellite phone. My cell was mostly going to be a camera since I didn't have money for a dedicated camera, and that small device felt like a necessary lifeline. The plan was straightforward. Mark would drop me at the site, I'd camp for 5 days, and he'd pick me up on day 6. I didn't want to burn all 2 weeks of PTO at work, so I purposely kept the trip short. Because it was my first time venturing out alone, I deferred to Mark's judgment on where to go. The place he picked wasn't one he visited often. His usual clients were hunters and anglers seeking rougher terrain. The area he chose for me was relatively flat, with only patches of denser woodland further. My tent would sit near a small lake with a clean view of mountains on the horizon. I know people will ask where exactly, but I won't give the location. Mark stopped flying people to that spot. He limited his clients, then retired from fly-ins after COVID hit the following year. It cost him business. Fishing is lucrative in Alaska, but he still won't bring people to that particular place. On most maps, the site wouldn't even register. If Mark ever flew over it, it would have been a tiny scenic dot. Mostly I keep quiet because of what I experienced there. What I saw has been impossible to shake from my head and my dreams. After Mark dropped me off and helped unload the gear, I spent the first day setting up camp about 85 yards from the lake, roughly 77 meters. I found a remarkably dry fallen log with substantial branches that made a perfect supply of firewood. A short walk inland from the shore, I found a small grove where I hung my food. Mark had warned me bears were present in the area, not necessarily a place famous for sightings, but it wasn't bear-free, so he stressed keeping food hoisted well out of reach. The lake had an unusual shape that made arranging a cooking area easy. For anyone who has camped before, it's sensible to keep your sleeping area, food storage, and cooking spot separated in a triangle. Some folks jokingly call it the Bermuda Triangle, because it helps reduce the chance of an animal wandering into all three at once. I didn't have funds for a proper camera, so my phone doubled as my photo gear. The satellite phone Mark handed me felt like the real safety net. That device offered reassurance. Someone could reach me if something went wrong. Borrowing Mark's rifle made practical sense. Bringing my own would have meant extra paperwork and airport hassles for a non-resident. I'd hunted as a teen, but carrying a gun alone in the backcountry felt heavier than old memories. At first, the openness of the site with mountains on the horizon felt safe. The dry log nearby supplied good firewood, and the routine pitching the tent, hanging food in the grove, arranging a small cooking area, kept me occupied. But that calm was fragile. What I saw there shattered it, and the image has returned to me night after night. I won't name the exact spot. It barely registers on maps. Mark stopped flying people there, and the memory itself is reason enough to keep quiet. Days 2 and 3 were mostly ordinary, nothing cinematic, just the slow rhythm of being alone outdoors. On the second day, I ate lunch at my site while a bull moose plunged its head into the lake, grazing on submerged plants like it owned the place. The third day, I went for a longer walk and climbed a low knoll with only a few stunted trees, where I sat for a long time watching a herd of elk move through the grass. While poking around the shoreline, I stumbled on an old, rust-eaten rowboat half buried beneath branches. It was beaten up but buoyant, so I dragged it back and left it near the water. I told myself I'd use it to take pictures across the lake. Everything changed on day 4. That morning had an unnatural hush, no birdsong, no distant animal calls, just the slosh of the lake and the persistent buzz of insects. Even with the repellent, the bugs swarmed whenever I went near the water, and I found myself staying close to the tent, reading to keep my mind busy. As evening fell, the quiet pressed in and a primitive unease settled under my skin. I piled the fire up higher than normal, wanting the glow and the crackle to reach farther into the dark. When I finally crawled into the tent, I kept the bear spray and the rifle within arm's reach. Sleep was a struggle. Every creak of the poles and whisper of wind felt magnified. Then a twig snapped nearby and I bolted upright, frozen. Something was moving into my campsite. I cupped my hands around the spray, and in the faint moonlight, I saw a large shadow pass over the tent wall. At first I assumed it was a bear silhouette distorted by angle and light, but the sounds were wrong, similar to a bear's huff but distorted, like a recording slowed down. The shadow moved closer, and then with a savage suddenness, whatever it was ripped open the tent and seized my sleeping bag. The force knocked me hard enough to jar my head, and for a breathless second, I glimpsed its face. Its head was bear-like, but my brain registered something off, a subtle wrongness that didn't fit any animal I knew. It wasn't grotesque, just not right. It had teeth and bulk and the strength of a large predator. I managed to flip the safety on the spray and hit it square in the face. It let out an agonized, guttural sound, unlike anything I'd heard in the wild, and bolted into the brush. I heard the chaos of it smashing through branches as I lurched for my ruined tent, fear steering me straight for the little boat instead of the mangled campsite. I shoved the boat into the water and paddled hard, mostly driven by panic. From the shore, the creature didn't follow me across the water, but it waded in until the water reached its chest and then stopped. Moonlight made a vague outline of it, enough to know it was still there, and I heard it tearing through my remaining gear with that same horrible noise. I curled up in the boat, soaked up to the waist and shivering uncontrollably, and kept tension so taut I couldn't sleep. After what felt like an eternity, the sounds died away and an uneasy silence settled. I spent the rest of the night drifting and occasionally paddling to keep myself from drifting ashore. By noon, I still hadn't dared go back, but hunger forced me to try. I eased the boat to shore and waited a long time before stepping out, every sense straining for movement in the trees. The campsite was obliterated, pole fragments, shredded fabric, and a sleeping bag that looked like it had been chewed beyond recognition. The rifle's stock was split clean down the middle and the wooden forearm had a long crack. My pack had been ripped open and its contents strewn around. My binoculars were in the fire pit but miraculously unscorched, one lens spider-webbed but usable. The food cache had vanished and several branches by the trees were snapped and torn. I grabbed what I could, a small battered backpack, a few clothes, the cracked binoculars, and rummaged desperately until I found the satellite phone still in its pouch and a couple of emergency flares. As I scooped up the bear spray from where it lay by the dead log, a low growl rolled out from the thicket behind me. My skin prickled and my legs felt like they would fold. I backed toward the boat, then the thing stepped out. It looked like a bear in the sketchiest possible way, all the broad shoulders and the hulking silhouette, but there was an uncanny aspect to its presence, as if my mind kept trying and failing to make the picture fit. Tears streamed down my face. My knees trembled and every instinct screamed to get away, but there was nowhere left to hide. I hurled a lit flare at it, hoping fire and bright light would force it back. It hesitated and gave me a breathing space. I seized that moment and bolted for the boat, probably the worst tactical choice with a predator close, but panic overrode better judgment. I shoved off toward deeper water while it waded in up to its chest, watching me. Its eyes were like coals, hot and furious in a way I'd never seen on any animal. It turned and began slashing at the shoreline with huge, deliberate swipes. When I saw the claws, my stomach dropped. Those talons could shred flesh in seconds. I reached for the paddle and my heart sank. It was gone. I could see it lying on the pebbly bank a few feet away. I started crying, something I rarely did back then, and the tears came hard. I scanned frantically for anything to use and spotted a stub of a dead branch sticking out of the shallows a little way off. It was a long reach, but maybe far enough to keep the creature from grabbing me. I awkwardly propelled the boat with my hands toward that branch while the animal stalked the shoreline, following my slow progress. I yelled and screamed at it to leave me alone, but it didn't flinch. When I finally pulled alongside the log and looked up, the shoreline was empty. I waited, breathing like I'd run a marathon, listening for the telltale crash of movement in the brush. Then thud, something heavy hit the ground behind me, and the woods erupted in snapping branches again. I pushed the boat away from the log and started to head down the lake toward the river, glancing over my shoulder. The beast followed, periodically roaring, a sound so raw and wrong that it made me flinch in a way I hadn't since childhood. I clamped my hands over my ears and tried to force the noise out of my head. I was cold, soaked halfway up, and utterly alone, terror pinned to my bones. As I struggled to steady the boat, my hand brushed something metal under the seat. I felt a latch and pulled out a padlocked metal box. The lock wasn't attached, the hasp came off easily. Inside was a vintage folding shovel, military surplus, heavy and clumsy, but better than nothing. It became my makeshift paddle. With that poor tool, I dug us along the water toward a river mouth, keeping my back to the shoreline and watching the dark tree line. I kept thinking animal, monster, fever dream. My mind offered every possibility and rejected each one in turn. I fumbled the satellite phone from my pack. The battery still had charge. I called Mark. Even through my sobs, he tried to steady me and promised he'd get there as fast as he could. He insisted I keep an eye on the thing and not let it get close. He thought I'd been dealing with a bear stalking me. His voice crackled with concern and urgency. Night fell again and clouds swallowed the moon. Exhaustion finally shut my eyes for a while. I woke once to every nerve screaming, convinced the creature had reached us, but after a tense silence I told myself it was just a fish. Eventually I dozed fitfully. At dawn the boat had drifted toward shore. I gathered the remaining gear I could carry and started hiking to the spot Mark agreed to meet me at. Those 3 hours of trekking were the worst I've ever known. Every rustle made me pivot, every shadow a threat. I barely registered moose or anything else. The animal that had been after me was all I could think of. When I crested a small rise, I saw Mark's plane sitting in a flat meadow, and I ran toward it with everything I still had. Mark was waiting at the plane door with a rifle across his shoulder. Relief hit me like heat. From the brush near the hill, we heard that familiar, brutal crashing. We both spun to look. We saw it rear up on its hind legs and bellow, and the way it stood, the posture, the roar, everything about it felt wrong for a bear. Mark jumped into the plane with me and got the engine sound up. He got us airborne before the creature could close the distance. From the air, I caught one last glimpse of it melting back into the tree line. On the ground, Mark was pale and shaking in a way I'd never seen from him in the decades I'd known him. He finally said, voice brittle, "I don't know what that was. That wasn't a damn bear." His hands trembled when he spoke. Back in civilization, Mark swore he'd never fly anyone to that area again. I was his first and apparently last camping client for that route. We reported the incident to Alaska Fish and Game. Investigators found the wreckage of my campsite and bits of gear scattered about. Heavy rains a few days after the attack had washed away or obliterated any potential tracks, and frustratingly, there was no fur or footprints to document. Officially, the report was logged as a bear incident, and because the site wasn't a popular access area, Fish and Game decided not to pursue it further. Only Mark and I ever saw the creature. When officials asked us to describe it, we both collapsed into tears before we could finish. The memory was too raw and the fear too deep to form a coherent report. After I returned to the lower 48, I spent years in therapy, mostly remote sessions during COVID, then in-person work afterwards. Part of my therapy involved exposure exercises that even included visits to zoo bears, meant to desensitize me. It didn't help. People told me I'd simply encountered an aggressive brown bear. I wish that were all it was. I'm not sure what I faced that night. I don't know if there's a name for it or if anyone else will ever see the thing I saw. All I know is I wake up some nights replaying its eyes and its roar. I pray every day that no one else stumbles on whatever lives up there. It lasted maybe half a minute. The USGS recorded it as a magnitude 7. Zero quake with aftershocks rattling as high as 5. Initial coverage said dozens were hurt, but there were no immediate deaths reported. Photos of toppled power lines, snapped trees, and crumbled roadways flooded every feed. I actually learned about it the way most of us do now, on Facebook. A close friend of mine in Anchorage, Penny, was at work when the first jolt hit. I breathed easier when I saw her post that she'd made it through the initial shock. But it wasn't until the next morning that I heard the full extent of what she went through and realized her day was irreparably shattered. She described the moment the tremor struck like the building had become a living thing about to collapse. For about 10 seconds it felt like the world was ending, she told me. Desks slid, cabinets crashed to the floor, windows burst inward, transformers popped and ceiling tiles rained down as everyone in the office scrambled for cover. Emergency crews showed up fast and her manager ordered an evacuation in case the foundation had been compromised. People tried to move calmly, but there was a tangible panic, the kind that makes everyone small and frantic at the same time. Outside, it looked unreal, like a scene from a nightmare movie, she said. Huge sections of roadway had given way, gridlock snaked through downtown, and reports quickly spread that large parts of southern Alaska were affected. Her first thought, she said, was to reach her son's elementary school and make sure he was safe. Driving was impossible. The streets were packed with people on foot, strangers helping strangers, banding together amid the chaos. I tried calling the school, but the lines were dead. I've been kicking myself for not buying Max a phone last Christmas, she told me, voice trembling. There was something else in how she described it that made the story even sharper, a weight beneath the disaster itself. I know that neighborhood. I figured I could walk, she said. but the scene she encountered turned walking into an odyssey. Water mains had burst, bridges were gone, and what should have been a 30-minute stroll became an ordeal of hours. Warnings about tsunamis along the southern coastline, places like Kodiak Island, only heightened everyone's fear, and that hit home for her because her sister lives there. "I don't pray much, but I prayed that day," she admitted. By 9 a.m., she'd made some progress but was still an hour away from the school, stalled by a huge sinkhole that forced her to find a different route. It yawned open like a canyon, only darker, like it dropped straight down into the planet. Smoke came up from it, and there was this sound. She stopped for a beat, the memory visibly shaking her as she searched for words. "I thought someone was trapped down there. I heard sirens and I ran toward it, but Kyle, it wasn't a person." Penny tried to describe what crawled out, and honestly, language felt too small for it. It was shaggy like it had a coat of fur, and about the size of a compact car. It had 3 legs, and these jagged bone-like spines stuck out of its sides and limbs. Horrible horns, teeth everywhere. And the sound it made like something dug up from under the world. She ran, of course she ran, and I could feel my heartbeat speed up as she told me she dove into an abandoned grocery store to hide. The thing was on her heels, tearing the entry apart as if the doors were tissue. It smashed through aisles, wrecking the place far worse than the quake had. She curled up among produce bins, but the animal's nose betrayed her in seconds. Its tongue flicked in and out between rigid teeth as it combed the store for her. "Its shrieks could raise the dead," she said. Hiding felt pointless, so she kept moving. She said she sprinted toward another sinkhole with the beast right on her tail, and then the ground crumbled beneath her. Her leg got snagged. The creature loomed above. "Its mouth opened so wide I thought it could swallow me whole," she whispered. By some grace, whatever was pinning her foot broke, and she hauled herself free. She kicked at the thing and scrambled out of the pit without looking back, running straight to the elementary school. When she arrived, the west side of the building had collapsed. She thought the worst, that the monster had already reached the children. Then she heard them, kids calling from the playground. They guided her toward a collapsed nook where she found her son, buried under rubble, his leg badly bruised but alive. Penny and the children shoved rocks aside and squeezed into the space to get to him. "I thank God 100 times," she said. They thought the danger was over. But the horror returned. The creature pushed aside boulders like they were paper, its claws pulverizing stone into dust. She and the boy sat in the dark, feeling the beast's breath and its tongue brush past her skin. "Kyle, I thought I was going to die," she told me. Then, to her disbelief, it turned and began clawing at another pile, digging with terrifying ease. I held Max until I thought my arms would go numb. Too afraid to breathe. Then through the roar and the settling dust, I heard faint, high whistles. The larger creature settled back into the crater it had carved, panting and lowing in a sound that wasn't quite animal, and from the broken rubble 3 smaller forms crawled out. You could tell by how the big one groomed them, gentle licks, careful nudges, that she was their mother, Penny said. The little ones wailed with a mix of terror and pain as they clambered onto her broad back. The mother made a deep, resonant sound and then, with the 3 pressed against her, turned her head toward us. For a second it felt like a fragile understanding passed between us, she told me. I held Max and it looked at us like it recognized something. Like we'd both found what mattered most. With one last flick of its forked tongue, the creature eased itself back into the opening and slid out of sight. Penny stayed frozen for a long time afterward, unable to move until the silence convinced her the danger had truly gone. She said she managed to free Max and call 911 soon after. An Alaska regional helicopter arrived minutes later and lifted them out. Even as we rose, I kept staring down where they had vanished, she said. They sank into that pit and disappeared, but the image hasn't left me. I catch myself wondering what their world down there is like. What kind of life could make something look like that? Before they left, Penny told me she took one photograph just as the creature disappeared. My pulse jumped when she mentioned it. This could change everything. I blurted the scientific implications, the headlines, but she just shook her head. Maybe, she answered slowly. But I've been replaying the day. Everybody's life got upended in an instant. People are scared and disoriented, and those animals looked like they were terrified too. I don't know that we should make them famous. I don't know that we owe them that. She sent the photo to me, then later asked me to delete it. I've held the image and the story for hours, weighing whether to share it with the world. Looking at those pale, sightless faces, lost, bewildered, I couldn't bear the idea of turning them into a spectacle. So I deleted the file. I know that will anger some of you, and doubt will follow. All I ask is that you honor Penny's wish and hold onto the feeling she gave me, the wrenching helplessness of that day. She knew in that ruined corridor of a school and amid all the chaos, that as long as she had Max alive and clinging to her, nothing else mattered. They had each other. They would live on. For any creature, human or not, that's the mercy we should hope for. The cockpit bathed itself in a sickly red glow as the warning light began to pulse. A mechanical voice droned in my headset, calm yet merciless. Engine failure. Engine failure. My throat went dry. The Cessna jolted like something alive, its bones creaking in protest. Every pulse of that crimson light matched the thudding in my chest. I reached for the emergency checklist, hands trembling despite all the hours of training that were supposed to make this easy. I went through each line, each step, over and over. Fuel check, mixture lit, throttle open, ignition both, nothing. The propeller coughed twice, then went still. The silence that followed was worse than any alarm. Come on, baby, I muttered, flipping the switch again. Static hissed in my ears. I tried the radio. No response, just the sound of air tearing past the fuselage. Below me, the wilderness stretched endlessly, an ocean of trees under an iron-gray sky. No roads, no towns, no sign of life. I was flying a dead bird over a green grave. Panic tried to dig its claws in, but I forced it down. Training, breathe, find a place to land. I leaned over the controls and scanned the endless sprawl of forest for a clearing. The GPS screen twitched and spun as if possessed, flipping between coordinates that made no sense. A storm was building in the distance. I could see the bruised clouds rolling in from the north, the wind shifting direction like a living thing. My altimeter needle dropped faster than I wanted it to. Then just ahead I saw it, a narrow scar in the trees. A clearing, maybe 30 yards across. Not ideal, but it was hope. I aimed for it. The rain came first, sudden and hard, turning the windshield into a blurred watercolor of motion. The yoke vibrated violently in my hands. Lightning flashed. For a moment I saw my reflection in the glass, pale, wide-eyed, and then a shadow cut across it. The treetops were rushing up to meet me. I pulled, too late. The left wing struck something thick, an explosion of bark, a metallic shriek, and the plane twisted like a toy in the hands of a cruel child. The last thing I remember was the world turning sideways, glass erupting inward, and the scream of metal folding in on itself. Then darkness swallowed everything. When consciousness returned, it didn't come all at once. At first there was only sound, a distant roar and the steady crackling of fire. Then came the smell, burning oil, rain-soaked wood, and blood. Pain bloomed in my side. My lungs stung with smoke. I blinked until shapes formed, a warped dashboard, wires dangling, the dull orange of flames licking what used to be my cockpit. I tried to move. Something sharp dug into my ribs. I looked down and saw the glass, a shard long and jagged, sticking from just below my ribcage. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to process it. Then the pain came rushing in. My first instinct was to pull it out. Training screamed at me not to, but panic screamed louder. The shard slid free with a sound like tearing fabric. I pressed my hand to the wound, feeling the warm slickness beneath my fingers. The air outside was thick with rain and smoke. I kicked at the crumpled door until it gave way, spilling me onto the forest floor. I dragged myself several feet away, gasping before collapsing against the mud. The wreckage burned behind me, orange against the blackened trees. The smell of fuel was overpowering. If the fire reached the tanks again, it would take me with it. The rain did what it could, smothering the smaller flames until only steam and smoke remained. I stared up through the canopy. No stars, just clouds like bruises rolling overhead. I had survived the crash, but that realization came with another, colder one. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. My radio was gone. My phone, if it still worked, was somewhere in the wreckage, likely melted. Every direction I looked was swallowed by forest. The horizon was nothing but dark teeth of pine and rock. I tore open the emergency kit, hands shaking, and began to patch myself up with alcohol wipes and gauze. The pain made my head swim, but I focused on motion, one breath, one task, one heartbeat at a time. By the time I was finished, night had already fallen. I used the shattered remains of the fuselage to create a Linta shelter. The metal panels still radiated heat from the earlier fire, so I nestled close to them, shivering. I managed to find a half-empty flare gun and a few matches wrapped in plastic. I built a small fire from broken branches, coaxing it to life beneath a wing fragment. The orange glow painted the trees in flickering shadows. Every creak of the forest sounded deliberate. Every drop of rain seemed to whisper my name. When I finally allowed my eyes to close, it wasn't from peace. It was from exhaustion, the kind that weighs more than sleep can cure. And yet, just before I drifted off, I thought I heard something under the storm. A voice, soft, distant, whispering. When I woke again, daylight bled through a ceiling of leaves the color of rust. My body had stiffened during the night. Every joint groaned when I tried to move. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then the smell of charred metal brought everything rushing back. The wreckage looked smaller in daylight. What had been a plane was now a heap of twisted aluminum, veined with steam. The rain had finished its work, the fires were gone, but the ground around the fuselage still smoked faintly, as though the forest itself were exhaling. I forced myself upright, clutching my side. The gauze had already soaked through with a brownish stain. My head throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I scanned the trees, expecting movement, a search party, something. Only the wind answered, hissing through the pines. It took an hour to salvage what little remained: a first aid kit, a dented water bottle, 2 protein bars, and my father's old compass, its glass spiderweb from the crash. The dial jerked back and forth, refusing to settle. I tapped it. It twitched again, pointing north, then west, then nowhere. Great, I muttered. Even you're lost. The air had that heavy, wet chill that seeps straight into the bones. I knew I needed shelter, but the clearing felt wrong now, too open, too watched. Still I stayed. Moving through the forest with a punctured side and no bearings was suicide. So I rebuilt what I could. Bent metal became a roof, scraps of upholstery became a bed. I stacked branches to feed the fire before nightfall. Every task had to be done twice. My thoughts kept slipping away mid-motion. I'd strike the match, then forget why my hands were shaking. When darkness returned, it came faster than I expected. The trees swallowed the last of the sun, and the clearing turned black except for the trembling flame at my feet. I tried not to think about the whisper I'd heard the night before. Logic told me it was wind or pain, or the memory of static still ringing in my ears. Logic wasn't as convincing when you were alone. I must have drifted in and out of shallow sleep, because the next sound came like a dream. The cough, wet, close, and human. My eyes opened to the glow of the fire. At first I saw nothing, just the crooked outlines of branches and the thin veil of smoke rising through the lean-to. Then movement, a shape hunched beside the fire, its back to me. My pulse spiked. The figure was thin, too thin, shoulders like wire under pale skin. It swayed gently, arms wrapped around its knees, as if warming itself. The sound came again, a gurgling cough that ended in a whimper. I told myself it was a survivor. Someone from another crash, another tragedy hidden by this godforsaken forest. I nearly called out, but something stopped me. The way it moved, the rhythm of its breathing. It wasn't right. Each inhale was a slow, deliberate draw, each exhale a tremor. I realized with growing nausea that I hadn't heard it arrive. No crunch of footsteps through wet soil, no rustle of branches. One moment the fire was alone, the next it was. I stayed still. Even my heartbeat felt too loud. The figure tilted its head toward the flames. I saw its profile then, illuminated in brief flashes of orange light. Its face was smooth where features should have been. No mouth, no nose, only the suggestion of eyes, dark and unblinking. It whispered, not words, a sound like air being drawn through a broken reed, rising, falling, rhythmic. I clamped a hand over my mouth. Sweat gathered at my temples despite the cold. The whispering stopped. The figure's head turned slowly, impossibly far, until it was looking straight at me. The firelight reflected in its eyes, two mirrors catching the glow. Something primal inside me took control. I shut my eyes and feigned sleep, forcing my breath into steady rhythm. The minutes stretched into torture. My legs cramped, my side throbbed. Every instinct screamed to run. A branch cracked somewhere in the dark. The figure stiffened, then jerked its head toward the noise. A low snort escaped its throat, almost animal, and then it was gone, vanishing into the tree line without a sound. I waited a long time before moving. When I finally opened my eyes, the clearing was empty. Only the ashes of the fire remained, pulsing faintly red. I didn't sleep again. I sat upright, clutching the flare gun, watching the forest until dawn. By morning, I had convinced myself it was a hallucination, a fever dream born from blood loss and exhaustion. It had to be. Still, I found myself checking for footprints in the mud around the fire. There were none. The next 2 days blurred together. I scavenged, rationed, and failed to keep track of time. My wound festered, each movement tore the scabbard. The rain never stopped. My mind started filling the silence with voices that weren't there, snatches of radio static, my father's voice calling through the headset. Stay calm, son. Keep her level. You can land this. Except my father had been dead for 3 years. By the 3rd day, I started talking to the wreckage. Out loud. It was easier than thinking. Then the forest began to talk back. At first, it was small things, echoes that didn't match, rustles that seemed to follow my steps. But that night, as I huddled under my shelter listening to the rain, I heard it again, that same cough. Then another, and another, not one voice this time. Several. I pressed my palms against my ears and whispered to myself until the sound faded. Sleep never came. By dawn, I made a decision. I needed water, food, direction, anything that wasn't the sound of my own fear. The creek-eyed glimpse from the air before the crash couldn't be far. I grabbed the broken compass, slung the first aid kit over my shoulder, and started walking. The forest closed around me like a throat. The trek to the creek should have been simple. Compass in hand, I moved cautiously, forcing my eyes to scan the ground for roots, rocks, or anything that could trip me. But the forest seemed determined to disorient me. Every hill looked the same, every tree a mirror of the last. I passed twisted saplings, moss-covered boulders, and streams that forked and disappeared like trick mirrors. My compass spun intermittently, refusing to settle, as if mocking me. By midday, exhaustion was creeping in. My side throbbed, every step felt like dragging a bag of rocks through mud, and the rain had returned, cold and relentless. I had eaten a single protein bar for breakfast and sipped only the water I had salvaged from the wreckage. Hunger clawed at my stomach, but the deeper fear was the silence, not the peaceful kind, but the oppressive, almost sentient kind. Then I saw it. Perched on a low branch just at the edge of my peripheral vision was a small, black object blinking faintly. At first, I thought it was a bird. But no bird would sit perfectly still, frozen, its glassy eye catching a shard of sunlight and blinking in perfect rhythm. The camera. I froze. The hairs on my neck stood on end. My pulse went into overdrive. My eyes darted around, half expecting another to appear. And then just faintly I saw more, a wire making from the camera down the tree trunk and disappearing beneath the soil. My hands, wet and shaking, tore at the dirt, frantically trying to trace it. Concrete. Solid, cold concrete beneath the moss. Buried, immovable. My breath caught in my throat. The forest wasn't empty. It was watched. Every step I had taken, every moment of solitude, had been under surveillance. Not just the figure I'd seen the first night. Not just the whispering voices. Someone or something was documenting me. I yanked myself up the tree and grabbed the camera, smashing it against the bark until it broke. The shards skittered across the leaves. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was a hollow pit forming in my stomach. I ran. Adrenaline flared, burning away the pain in my side. Branches tore at my face and arms, roots snagged my boots, but I didn't stop. My only thought was to get back to the camp before nightfall. The forest shifted. Shadows stretched in impossible directions. Sounds that had once been distant, snaps, thuds, whispers, now followed me. My lungs heaved. My legs burned. Every time I dared to look back, the darkness seemed thicker, heavier, almost moving toward me. By the time I reached my lean-to, the sun was already dipping below the horizon. I didn't stop to build a fire. I collapsed behind the metal panels, chest heaving, blood still oozing from my side. My mind wouldn't let me rest. The cameras had been there all along, recording me. Perhaps the whispers, the shadows, the first figure, everything was a performance for someone else. The night came and I didn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves sounded deliberate. Every distant cough set my nerves on fire. I dared not breathe too loudly, dared not move a muscle. My mind began to fill in the gaps with horrors I couldn't see. Faces pressed to the trees, long arms dangling, eyes too large, mouths moving in silence. And then I heard it, a chorus of whispers. Not one voice, dozens, hundreds perhaps. They weren't human, yet they carried the cadence of language I almost understood. I pressed my back against the metal, stomach curling, eyes wide. I wanted to scream, to run, to bury myself in the mud, but I could. Something primitive in me froze me in place. My survival instincts warred with my terror. The fire's last embers glowed red beneath the lean-to. I realized I had been holding my breath for hours. My body trembled uncontrollably. The whispers faded, replaced by the soft scuttle of movement. And then I saw them, shadows slipping between the trees, tall, elongated, impossible. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They just watched. I didn't sleep that night. Days passed in a haze of survival and paranoia. I scavenged what I could from the wreckage, stretched the rationed water, and constructed better shelter with the metal panels and branches. Every night the whispers returned. Every night I imagined eyes on me. Every night I questioned my own sanity. I tried to focus on something rational. I found the creek I had been searching for and rationed water daily. I tried marking trees, leaving signs to keep my bearings. I drew circles in the mud, tested the compass, counted the days by the sun. But nothing worked. The forest bent reality, twisted time, and made sure I felt watched. And then I found more cameras. Hundreds of them embedded in tree trunks, branches, even on rocks near the creek. Each one blinked green like the distant stars of a false night sky. They weren't random, they were everywhere, infinite. The forest was a labyrinth of surveillance. The whispers were part of it, part of something bigger, something older than me, something that didn't belong to this world. I became obsessive. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. I could no longer ignore the feeling crawling along my skin, that itch of intrusion. I had to know they weren't just cameras. I had to know the watchers weren't inhuman. And yet I dared not move too quickly, lest I summon the thing I had glimpsed on the first night, the tall figure, its stone-gray skin, its hollow eyes. By the 7th day, I was a shadow of myself. Feverish, thin, and trembling, but alive. I had convinced myself that staying near the wreckage was safer, that light and fire offered protection. But by the 7th night, I knew instinctively that staying put was a trap. The whispers had grown louder, the rustling closer, and the shadows no longer waited in the distance. I packed what little I had salvaged from the wreckage, metal scraps, fire-starting supplies, the compass that spun like it had a mind of its own, and decided to move toward the creek. There at least I could refill my water and possibly find a better escape route. Night fell like a guillotine. The trees pressed in, their silhouettes twisted and unreal. I felt them before I saw them, the tall figures, their elongated limbs hidden in the darkness, yet somehow moving in concert with the whispering. 50, 70, I couldn't count. Their number seemed to grow with every step I took. And then I heard the mumbling. Not one voice, not a chorus, but dozens of low, guttural repetitions, each phrase impossible to understand, yet familiar enough to gnaw at my sanity. My legs moved on instinct alone. I ran, leaping over roots, diving under branches, mud sucking at my boots. I had no destination, only the primal need to survive. Ahead, the forest opened slightly, revealing a scattering of green lights among the trees. Hundreds, maybe thousands, blinking in unison. The cameras, their presence was almost physical, pressing against me with the weight of their attention. I stumbled into a ditch, skidding face first into mud. My side screamed, but I ignored it. I couldn't stop. The whispering grew frantic. The figures had caught up. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, reflecting the green dots of the cameras. Long limbs swung with unnatural grace as they closed the distance. My throat constricted with terror. My only thought, escape. I ran blindly until my foot caught on something. A boulder. I flew headfirst into a tree. Pain exploded across my skull. Stars and blackness consumed me. And then above the cacophony of whispering and rustling, I heard it, the low, rhythmic whir of rotors cutting through the forest air. Relief and confusion collided in my chest. Blinding searchlights swept through the trees. Armed figures in camouflage appeared, shouting, pulling me upright. They carried me out of the dark, their grips firm, unyielding. The figures didn't ask questions, didn't pause for explanation. Daylight finally broke through the trees. I had survived. Somehow, miraculously, I had survived. My body trembled, soaked in mud and blood, yet the terror had momentarily lifted. I let myself drift back into unconsciousness as their voices guided me away from the forest. When I woke, I was restrained to a hospital bed. Machines beeped nearby, steady and unthreatening. My wrists were cuffed. My head throbbed, each pulse a reminder of the crash, the forest, the creatures, the cameras. A man in uniform entered the room, cold and professional. His questions were routine, mechanical. Why were you flying in restricted airspace? What did you see? Were there any passengers? I lied. I lied about the forest, the figures, the cameras. I said nothing that could draw attention, nothing that could put me back in danger. Days passed under surveillance and questioning. I was eventually released, given a notice I had to sign, a warning never to speak about the events in the forest. Even now, I feel the eyes on me. Perhaps it is paranoia. Perhaps it is the truth. I cannot shake the sense that I am still being watched, measured, observed. The memory of those stone-gray figures, their hollow eyes, the blinking cameras, haunts me. I write this as a warning, as a confession, as a way to stay sane. I do not know if anyone will believe me, but I know what I saw. I know what I ran from. And I know that somewhere deep in the forest, the watchers remain. For now, I am alive. But every shadow, every whisper, reminds me that survival is never certain. Working the oil fields up on Alaska's north slope isn't for everyone. The isolation will grind you down if you're not built for it. Months of nothing but white tundra and frozen blackness. I'd been doing pipeline maintenance up near Prudhoe Bay for 6 years by the time this happened. February 2018. The pay was great, life-changing money, which is why guys like me, Brad, and Tommy kept coming back. We were a solid crew. We kept each other alive through blizzards and equipment failures that could kill faster than you could key your radio. That rotation, we just wrapped up a brutal week-long repair on a cracked section of pipe. Freeze-thaw cycles had split it like old bone. The company was putting us up in one of those prefab bunkhouses about 40 miles south of Dead Horse, just off the Dalton Highway. Yeah, the same ice road the truckers use. The drive back should have been routine. We'd done it 100 times in Brad's modified Ford F-350, chains on all 4 tires, heating so powerful it could roast you if you weren't careful. Tommy was passed out in the back seat, trying to catch up on sleep. I rode shotgun, keeping Brad company as he piloted us through what was shaping up to be a real snowstorm. Visibility was down to 30 feet, if that. The headlights bounced off the swirling snow, turning it into a hypnotic white tunnel. You'd swear you were flying through space. 2 hours into the drive, Brad slammed the brakes so hard Tommy hit the back of my seat. Out in the storm, barely visible, was a lone figure stumbling along the roadside. No vehicle, no emergency lights, just a person in a heavy parka moving with that weird, uncoordinated desperation of someone in hypothermia. Brad pulled over. Up here, you don't leave anyone behind. Not when it's 40 below and dropping. Tommy woke up cursing, but shut up as soon as he saw what we were staring at. We sat there maybe 5 seconds, watching this person stagger through knee-deep snow about 20 yards ahead. The parka was old military surplus, olive green, fur-trimmed hood whipping in the wind. What struck me first was his movement. Not the usual stumbling gait of someone freezing to death, but something mechanical, like he was following a path only he could see. Brad honked twice. Nothing. The guy just kept plodding forward, arms slack at his sides. Christ, he's going to die out there, Tommy muttered, already reaching for the door handle. Brad threw the truck in park and we all piled out. The wind hit like knives. Even in heavy gear, the cold crawled through every seam. We jogged toward the man, shouting, our voices swallowed by the storm. Within 10 feet, Brad grabbed his shoulder to turn him. That's when it got strained. The man's face was paper white, but not frostbitten. His eyes were cloudy gray, like dirty ice, and they seemed to look right through us. 3 days of stubble dark against that unnatural skin. His lips moved constantly, forming silent words. And the scar, a jagged line running from his left temple down to his jaw. A survivor's scar. Sir, are you okay? Tommy yelled, waving a hand in front of the man's face. No reaction. Just that swaying stance, those cloudy eyes locked on some invisible point, lips never stopping. I leaned in close, fighting the urge to back off, and caught the sound of what he was saying. 247. 247. 247 over and over. Brad and Tommy exchanged looks. We'd all heard stories of folks losing it up here, but this felt different, wrong on a level I couldn't name. Still, leaving him out there meant explaining a frozen corpse to the troopers. It took all 3 of us to guide him to the truck. He didn't resist or help, just let us move him like a mannequin. His body was stiff and ice cold even through the parka. He didn't shiver once. Anyone who spent time up here knows shivering is your last line of defense. When it stops, you're in real trouble. We got him in the back seat with Tommy, who pressed himself against the far door like he could phase through it. Brad cranked the heat and got back on the road. For 10 minutes, nobody said a word. Just the heater fan on max and those lips still moving, still repeating those numbers. Then Tommy said what we were all thinking. Doesn't he look like that snowmobiler who vanished a couple winters ago, the one they never found? Brad's knuckles whitened on the wheel. I remembered that case. February 2016, a local guy named Christopher Vaughn went missing on a solo snowmobile trip. They'd found his sled smashed into a tree about 15 miles from where we'd picked up our passenger. Blood on the seat, drag marks that led into the woods and just stopped. Search teams had spent 2 weeks combing the area before declaring him dead. His brother used to drink at the same bar in Dead Horse. Said Christopher had that exact scar from a childhood accident with a boat propeller. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror. Same scar, same face shape, even the eyes, though in the photos Christopher's had been brown, not this milky gray. The shelter appeared through the storm like a metal mirage, its yellow lights barely cutting through the whiteout. We radioed ahead. Static, not unusual in weather like this. Brad parked as close as he could. We were about to move our passenger inside when he spoke for the first time, voice gravelly and wrong, like someone talking underwater. Can't go in. Not yet. Not until 2:47. Tommy jumped hard enough to bang his head. But no way were we leaving him out in the truck. It took Brad bear hugging him from behind while Tommy and I each grabbed an arm, but we managed to haul him inside. The second we crossed the threshold, he went limp, dead weight that nearly dropped us all. We laid him on a bottom bunk. Brad went to check the radio. Tommy put on water for coffee. I stayed with the guy checking his pulse, slow but steady, and trying to make sense of him. Up close, more details jumped out. Fingernails long, curved, yellowish, like he hadn't cut them in months. No smell at all. Not sweat, not body odor. Nothing. His pockets held a single item, a snowmobile key on a cracked leather fob branded C. VON 2015. The kind they sell at the Dead Horse gas station. Tommy's face went pale when he saw it. That's not possible, he whispered. But it was. Brad came back shaking his head. Storm interference. We were stuck at least 8 to 10 hours. Then the power flickered. Just one, but enough to make us all look up. The light steadied, but something in the room had shifted. Our guest's eyes were open, staring at the clock on the wall. 11:30 p.m. His lips moved faster. 2:47, Tommy's grip on my arm hurt. We need to get out of here, he said. Brad pointed at the window. Snow so thick you couldn't even see the truck. We were trapped, and deep in my gut I felt like that was the point. The hours crawled. We took turns watching him while pretending things were normal. Brad made sandwiches none of us ate. Tommy cleaned his tools for the third time. I kept checking the storm. The man never moved, eyes locked on the clock, lips whispering that countdown. Around 2:00, exhaustion hit. Tommy took first watch. Brad and I grabbed bunks. I didn't think I'd sleep, but the adrenaline crash knocked me out. I woke to Tommy shaking me, panic in his eyes. The clock read 2:46. Brad stood by the door, wrench in hand. He's gone, Tommy gasped. I just looked away for a second and he was gone. We searched the shelter, 40 feet of prefab steel, but there was nowhere to hide. The man had simply vanished. 3 deliberate knocks hit the metal door. Slow, measured, 2:47. Then the knocks came at the north window. Then the south. Then back to the door, circling the shelter. Brad's grip on the wrench was bone white. That's impossible, he muttered. The knocking stopped at 2:48, leaving a silence so heavy it pressed on our ears. We stayed frozen until dawn, when the storm finally broke around 7:00. We bolted for the truck. Outside, the snow was pristine. No footprints, nothing, but Tommy never made it. Brad and I turned and he was gone. No sound, no struggle, no tracks, just empty air where he'd been 2 seconds before. We didn't stop driving until Fairbanks. We filed a missing person report. Told them about picking up the stranger. Left out the part about him maybe being Christopher Vaughn. 3 days later, they found Tommy's body 15 miles from the shelter, in the exact spot where Vaughn's snowmobile had crashed. Frozen solid, lips blue, drag marks in the snow that just stopped.